Hey there, Dango Stu here. Today's video is just doing a general service on an outboard. Something I probably should have done a long time ago. We've obviously done a whole lot of videos on various sort of tasks you might do if you've got a fault or something you want to service individually. But I thought this time I'd just go through the whole sort of list of things I would do on an outboard if it came to the shop, and things that you can all do yourself if you're looking at servicing your outboard before the start of the boating season. So we'll get to it. Now the outboard I've got here at the moment is a two-stroke. So I will find an old four-stroke somewhere just to sort of go through changing the sump oil if you happen to be doing a four-stroke. But just about everything else is pretty much the same. So I'll use this, it's a Yamaha 30 we're going to be looking at. So I'll use that as our main outboard for this, and I'll just show you where there are some differences with other models. Now one of the first things I'll do with a service is a kind of a general sort of visual inspection. It's very easy to sort of dive straight into changing oil and doing all this sort of stuff, but when you service an outboard, it's a really good opportunity to sort of cast your eye over it in a way that you wouldn't when you're just normally sort of boating. So I'll grab the camera and we'll just have a look around and I'll show you the sorts of things you're looking for. So starting here, one of the first things that sort of just caught my eye then is how much this fuel hose is starting to perish, certainly the outer casing anyway. Depending on how this is going, this whole hose, you can see it's pretty bad, so I'd say that's pretty much in line for replacement. If it's just the end, you can cut a bit off and put your hose clamp a bit further, but I'd say that's getting close to the end of its life. This boat lives outdoors, so it cops a lot of UV. Now, something else I noticed just looking around, and we'll be doing this later, is a lot of this grease here is quite hard. That's not necessarily something I'd particularly be, looking at as a part of visual inspection, but it's just one of the other things that sort of first caught my eye. So when we go to put new grease in this, we might find a bit of trouble with trying to push the old grease out, given how hard it's become, but we'll sort of cross that bridge when we come to it. Now, other thing you're really looking for is loose bolts and things. Connections, electrical connections, can be quite frustrating to diagnose if they get this sort of intermittent poor connection, which quite often can be from things vibrating loose. So looking for any nuts and things that have vibrated loose and don't look up to scratch. Even just putting a socket on them and giving them a really sort of bit of a turn. You're not looking to crank them to the point of snapping them or anything, but it is a good way just to feel where they've come loose. And a particular importance with outboards, obviously, is whether this, see I can even see there, this mounting bolt is completely loose. So that's the kind of thing you're looking for. If you just jump into doing, your oil change, spark plug change, these are the sorts of things you'll miss. So just give it all a once over, have a look at everything. Then we've got things like the anode under here. It's actually not too bad. It's got a fair bit of meat left on it. So all your bolts, your linkages, your electrical connections. So all this stuff doesn't happen in a particular order, but one of the things I tend to look at first is things like my fuel filters. I'm looking at cleaning it, but I'm also just having a look what's in it. If it's got some water in it, then we know we might need to do a carburetor clean. If it's got a lot of junk in it, we might look at flushing the tank out. So I sort of consider this outboard service to be pretty much from the fuel tank itself to the outboard, but highly recommend you look at the whole boat, the steering, the lights, the bilge pump, etc, etc. But in this case, we're going to limit to the motor itself. So these will have a little, I think it's a 14mm socket on the bottom. So I'm just going to grab a spanner and wind this fuel filter off, and we'll have a look what's inside there. So when this bowl comes off, there's the bowl itself, and then there's the little mesh filter. The mesh filter quite often will stick up into this top section because it's sort of sealed in there. So we've got the bowl here, and then the little mesh filter that's just pressed in, so it will pull out. Filter itself doesn't look too bad. I'll just give it a little spray. It's got a few drops on it, a few bits of dirt. And then if we look in here, you'll see there's a bit of rubbish floating around in there. Hopefully, if it's focusing, not too bad, to be honest. I mean, it's there to do a job. So I'll just tip that rubbish out of here. So that's gone. I'll spray this mesh with a bit of just a bit of brake cleaner or something. You could use a bit of compressed air, but just be careful. It's a bit delicate. That's all. So I'll pop this back together now. There's an O-ring in the top that seals here. Just have a check of the condition of that. You just don't want fuel leaking out from this fuel filter. So Just press that back on. Screw the fuel filter on. I'm just going to give this a tiny little, 16th of a turn, just to secure it. And then that back on. Lots of different outboards will have multiple fuel filters, particularly things like EFI models. They'll have a coarse filter, a fine filter. You might have a larger water separating fuel filter on the inside of the transom. So just make sure you go through all the fuel filters that the motor has. You can see here these spark plugs are pretty rusty. So external rust like this doesn't necessarily mean the plug's not working that well, but I'd say they're definitely due for replacement. So we'll pop those out, we'll have a look at the electrodes on them, and then we'll pop some new ones in. I'm going to get these plugs out with one of these just some little spark plug tools. This is a 13/16. Any sort of deep socket will do, but you do get special spark plug sockets that make life a little bit easier just for holding the plug. So this is a fair bit of carbon. This looks like it's been running quite rich actually, which is interesting. So we'll take a look. When you take your plugs out, keep them in order, because it's good to know which plug went with which cylinder. So if one plug looks particularly bad, it can be an indication there's a problem with that cylinder, or it generally is. And if you take them all out, mix them up, then you won't know which cylinder it was. So once again, pretty similar. So no big difference between the two, which is another good thing. The owner did tell me this outboard was running on about double the oil it was supposed to be, so that can explain a bit of that fouling of the plugs. Alright, now I've got that out, I'm going to do a compression test on this. Just as a bit of a health check, but it's also something that's actually nice to record against your services so you can track the compression as the years go by. So at the start of each season you can know what your compression was last year, what it is this year, is there any obvious deterioration, particularly in one cylinder. If they're deteriorating evenly, that's kind of just the outboard getting older. If one cylinder drops, maybe you've got something you need to look at. Got a video on compression testing, so I'm not going to go through it in huge detail, but just showing the steps I'd take. So I've got that in cylinder 1, I'll just go and crank it over a few times with the throttle open. So that's come out at sort of 125. It's pretty good for an outboard of this vintage. So I'll just reset that and do the bottom cylinder. Best I could get out of that after even more pulling was about 60. So this engine's not healthy. Now the owner told me this engine wasn't healthy. So what I'm actually going to do is swap it, because they've given me another outboard to put on this. So I'll swap them over, and then we'll continue the service on the new outboard. No point putting any time or money into this one now until it gets fixed. So I'll leave this one as it is, do a quick swap, and we'll pick up. So I guess that's one way you can service an outboard. You sort of just have a little bit of a look around. If you see something wrong, put a new motor on. Alright, let's push on with this one. So that one I'm going to take the head off at some stage, we'll have a look. To give you a bit more of the history, the owner had actually reported that all of a sudden it had been a little bit harder to pull, or noticeably harder to pull the outboard than it was before to pull start it. So I think one of the rings is caught up in the cylinder, making it hard to turn over and giving us this compression problem. And that's why this boat came in for a service with another outboard in it, sort of expecting the other one wouldn't really be serviceable. So as you can see, this outboard is much cleaner than the other one. It doesn't look like it's done anywhere near as much work. Plugs weren't as rusty. You've obviously got the oil that you get from a two-stroke motor, but they're not quite as sort of fouled up as the ones from the original outboard either. But the fuel filter has got quite a bit of sort of residue in it, it's stuck. Same with the actual mesh. And the fuel smells terrible, it's really gone off. So I'm thinking this outboard hasn't done a lot of work, but it probably has sat around for a long time. So I'll pop some new plugs in this while we're here, before we push on. Obviously, have a look what plugs are in it. They're 99% chance to be the right ones, unless someone else has been at it. The service manual will tell you, and also it's really common for outboards to have a little sticker telling you. In this case, it's the NKG BR8HS10. So I'll go grab a couple of those and we'll pop them in. So one thing worth noting, you'll see on the packet here, hopefully that's focusing. So the 10 in a, where was it? Oh, there we go, on the end. In the B8HS10, the 10 is a 1mm gap. So there needs to be 1mm gap. They come pre-gapped, so there's no real issue there. Once it's threaded and it's snugged, you need to turn it about an extra half to 2/3 of a turn when it's new to get the crush washer to sort of seat properly. So there's no torque setting for these spark plugs. Just seat it down and then turn it an extra half to 2/3. So just going to gently wind these in by hand till they're snug, just to make sure they're not cross-threaded. You can really feel it when you're just using your fingers. You can actually also start by just winding a little bit counterclockwise until you feel it sort of click and the thread engages, and then start turning it clockwise to wind it in. Then once it's there, it's snug. Just going to turn it that extra half turn. This one's snug, so just do it that extra half turn, and that's all they need. Make sure your leads go back on in the same order. Quite often you can't get them out of order because the top lead won't reach the bottom, but just be careful if they are long enough to reach, and make sure they're pushed on snugly, not just sort of resting on, otherwise you'll get a sort of intermittent spark out of them. So that's spark plugs, pretty straightforward. Nice easy job you can do yourself, that's for sure. Next thing I'm going to do is drain the gearbox oil. Those of you who sort of subscribe to the channel will have seen this a few times in the past, so I won't agonise over this. Now this drain plug's pretty tight, so I'm just going to grab a shifter and put it on the end of a screwdriver. Quite often you'll need to do this if these have been done up too hard. So I'm just going to use one hand, hold the screwdriver in, and the other to bring the shifter around until it's cracked. So you'll see here, hopefully that's in focus, this has got a few metal filings on it. This bottom plug has a magnet in it, so any little bits of metal that come off the gears are designed to get attached to this magnet rather than just floating around in the gearbox. Also going to now undo this top screw, which will let the air in and let this oil flow out a bit more freely. Bring the camera in and show you. This oil's in really good nick. There's no problem with that. If it looked a bit milky, we might suspect the oil seals would be gone, one of them. But in this case it's all looking pretty healthy. So I'm going to let that drain, and then I'm just going to do a quick pressure test just to confirm there aren't any leaks in this gearbox. Because it's been sitting on dry land, the oil seals may have perished, but no water's got in. So the pressure test really is a definitive way to know. This outboard didn't have a prop on it, so I'm going to swap the prop from the other one. But as a general part of a service, I would highly recommend taking the prop off and just having a look if there's any fishing line in here behind the thrust washer, because if you have picked up some fishing line, that's what's going to cut this seal and eventually get water into your gearbox oil. So I'm also going to now just clean this spline and put a bit of grease on it. A bit of a wipe with a rag. And then just a bit of marine grease. I'm just going to pump this from a grease gun. Just put it onto this spline. Okay, so that's all good to go now. Ready to put the prop back on. I'll show you putting it on, and taking it off is pretty much just the same process in reverse. To do the pressure test on the gearbox now it's finished draining, I'm just going to put this top plug back in. Do that up snugly. And then this is just a threaded barb designed to fit this gearbox to a hose. And just pressed onto this pressure gauge pump. I've got a video on doing this particular test, making a pretty cheap version of this tool, so if you're interested, check that one out. I'll put a link to it. Then all I'm going to do is pump it up. So we've now got 10 psi, and the spec really is gearbox should be able to hold 10 psi for, I think it's only like 10 seconds or something. It's not a long period of time. So this gearbox is holding pressure, so we can pretty much give it a clean bill of health. Now we know that the oil seals are good, we'll pop some fresh oil in. If that pressure was dropping, we could have a listen around, see if we can hear where the air's escaping. One of three places. It's either the oil seals around the prop shaft, oil seals around the drive shaft, or the oil seals around the gear selector linkage. The drive shaft and the gear selector linkage, you need the leg off to see, or foot off to see, sorry. Both these plugs have these little red fibre washers on them. So I'm just going to grab a couple of new washers. Yamaha sell these washers as a little set of two, as a part of a service kit, so they're pretty easy to obtain. Now what I've got is this is actually a bottle with of Yamaha gear case lube. It's essentially a kind of a 75-80 weight oil. I just keep using this bottle because it's a nice convenient one. It's actually got some liquid moly gear case oil in it, which is good oil, but as long as it's the right stuff. But the thing I like about that bottle is it's a nice kind of convenient pump pack that once again has got the same thread. Now I've got this little pump pack threaded into the bottom hole, top hole's open. Then I'll just start pumping this oil through until we get oil coming out the oil level hole. The initial oil that comes through might be sort of a bit aerated, so give it a chance for the bubbles to sort of rise up out of the oil, and then give it a few more pumps until you get pretty clear solid oil coming out that top hole. So here we go, once it starts coming out, you'll see how there's just a few little bubbles in the oil. So I'm just going to let it sit for a little bit. The bubbles will sort of rise out of the oil, out of the gearbox, and just slowly give it a few more pumps, and we're getting reasonably clean oil now. So the next thing I do is put that top hole in, because the lack of air coming out will help me undo this bottom one without it all rushing out. So I'll put the top one in, then we'll put the bottom one in. So once it's snug, I've just used that shifter again just to give it like another kind of, you know, eighth of a turn or less even. Not enough to make it impossible to get undone again, but just enough to make sure the water doesn't get past that new fibre washer. Same with the bottom plug, up snug, then just another kind of eighth of a turn. Alright, gearbox all done. Next up I'm just going to run around with a grease gun and put some grease in all the grease nipples. So I'll show you where they are and what they're about. So they're a little bit different on each outboard. But we've got one down here, and this is the sort of pivot tube coming down through here. There's one here which I think is actually just to grease this locking pin. And then there's one around here and here, sorry, here, for the tilt tube. Now this tilt tube is a solid tube, so none of this actually gets into the tilt tube if you have a push-pull steering cable. This is purely so that the motor can tilt up and down, nothing to do with your steering. So just be aware of that. It seems to be a bit of a common misconception. So as I pump in grease, it's actually filling the cavity between this casing and the pivot tube inside, and also going in behind the nylon bushings. So you'll see here, as you pump, Grease is coming out the side here. Once you get clean grease, you know you've displaced all the old grease that you can. It's very messy doing this, but it's all this old grease that comes out you're actually trying to do. That's sort of your goal. Now, in this case, we were putting it in the bottom and it was coming out the top, which is kind of good. Means it's making it all the way up, but it's nice to see grease coming out the bottom bushing and the top bushing and everywhere. If it doesn't, it means that the grease has got a bit hard and it's sort of finding this path of least resistance. This grease has found a way out and it's all going to come out there. By doing this job regularly, you're displacing that old grease with new grease before it gets a chance to go hard, which means it's going to spread more evenly. So this is something I recommend doing quite regularly. In addition to the grease nipples on the pivot tubes and tilt tube, etc., a lot of these linkages have a little bit of grease on them. Now, it's kind of good to see this outboard actually because it is in quite new condition, and from the factory there isn't a lot of grease everywhere. And I do find that a lot of these outboards tend to get a little bit over-greased. I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, some areas can run a little bit more smoothly. Like for example here, you can see where these mechanisms sort of run over a sort of cam-style arrangement, I guess you'd call it. A little bit of grease on there can make it smoother, but grease can also collect a lot of dirt. So if you do start greasing linkages, which is sort of definitely a part of the service process, make sure you do so reasonably sparingly. You know, it's usually just a small dab, you know, wiping these types of surfaces. Any sort of linkages, these ball joints, things can be lubricated, but just, I guess, just do it with a, you know, less is more sort of attitude, I guess is all I'm trying to say. So I'll just have a look around here. All our linkages I think are on this starboard side. We've just got this fuel filter I'll attach again. Once I've cleaned that out, yeah, so there's really nothing. So really, if you are going to do this lubricating, it's things like these little sort of nylon bushings and these little sort of pin joints for like chokes, throttles, gear selectors, etc. The grease I use for that, if you're interested, is just a tube of this Yamaha Grease A. It's the sort of grease that if you can buy it just at most Yamaha dealers, and it'll last you forever and a day. You don't use a lot of this grease at all. You use it very sparingly. So not that any marine grease probably is going to be fine. Most marine grease seem to be some sort of lithium-based grease. I just picked this up because it's also nice and handy little tube compared to those grease guns or a tub of grease. I'll swap this prop onto the other outboard now, but this procedure essentially is going to be the same as if you were taking the prop off, checking for fishing line and putting it back on, greasing it. So this split pin has just been bent down here, so all we need to do is get these two ends, the tails of the split pin straight again, roughly straight, and then just get a pair of side cutters in. And if you can get a grip on it, you can sort of wiggle and lever it out. And once that's out, we'll just put a socket on here. This nut's a 22mm socket on this outboard. And then I'm just going to put a block of wood in here to stop the prop rotating. Grab that nut off. So nut, washer, prop. So while installing this prop, first thing on is the thrust washer and the prop itself. The spacer, not all outboards have spacers there. Flat washer, and this castellated nut. Same as taking it off. Just use the bit of wood to block it. And we're just going to tighten this till it's snug, and then I'm going to wind it just a smidge on, and I'll show you in here. Hopefully show you with the old split pin. So this is the hole in the prop shaft here, and we're just making sure that hole is lined up with the gap between the little creases on this castellated nut. So I'll go grab a new split pin and we'll lock this off. So I'll just slip this down here. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky because the pin you've got is longer than the space here in the outboard. So you might have to either bend it slightly to get it in, or just trim the edges before you push it in. Okay, a few taps gets it in. The shorter leg I'm just going to bend up and over the nut, and the bottom leg I'm just going to trim off, and that's good to go. We'll look at the water pump on this outboard next. Now, water pump's a funny thing, you know. I mean, they can run for a long time. It is a little bit of effort to check them out, and it does depend on how much running the motor gets, but at the same time it's kind of critical. So I'd be inclined to perhaps take a look every couple of years at the longest, so maybe every second season, something like that. But just be aware, if you do take it apart, depending on the style of water pump, you will potentially need some sort of gaskets or whatever to replace it. Now, I've actually got a sort of a full water pump kit for this, so I'll show you what comes in that. I'm not expecting to need to use much of this for this particular outboard, because this is the new one we put on. Well, new, it's had very little work. So I'll probably end up putting most of these parts onto the one we took off at the start of the video. But it's always good to have these parts on hand, because if you take it apart, well, it depends whether you need the boat. You know, if you don't need the boat in a hurry, then great, take it apart, see what you need, go and get the bits. It's probably the best way to do it. But if you are looking to sort of do this job, put the boat back on the water, just make sure you've got all the kind of gaskets, O-rings, etc. that you might need, even if the impeller's in good shape, just so you can put it back together and not have a leak. This Yamaha kit's pretty complete. Possibly a little bit of overkill for a service. Oh, look at this. You can get a nice little picking list of what's in it. So this literally is down to every bolt or whatever you need, but the primary things we're looking at is in this case there isn't a gasket, but there is an O-ring, probably in pretty good condition, but you know, doesn't hurt to have. The impeller itself, which is obviously your big ticket kind of, or your most common wear item in this. There's the stainless housing that the impeller rotates inside, so they're the sort of two items that wear against each other. Obviously, this being stainless, it's the rubber impeller that wears more rapidly, but these can suffer corrosion. There's the base plate that the impeller spins on at the bottom, with the housing on top, and then this is the actual pump housing that this metal insert goes into. This is the woodruff key that connects the impeller to the drive shaft, so without this, the two can spin independently, so this is what locks the impeller onto the drive shaft. And then washers. Oh, and here's a little the little seal that goes into the housing where the pipe comes out. So we've got everything we need, should there be a problem with any part of this. So now that's ready, let's take the leg off and have a look what condition this one's in. To get to the water pump, which is sort of sitting up in here, we've got 4 bolts, 2 on each side, and then we've got this locking nut that connects the 2 halves of the gear selector. So I'm going to undo this locking nut to disconnect these two. So I undo this small nut a little bit down, then I'm going to wind this collar up, undo these 4 bolts, and then we'll slide it down. So here you'll see now this collar's been wound up, so this is separate, and 4 nuts are out. So I'll just start pulling the gearbox down. As things often are with outboards, boats, anything near water, this gearbox actually is stuck. So if you're sure you've got all the bolts off, then I tend to sort of give it a tap with a hammer. Just be really careful though. This is just a plastic hammer, you know, rubber hammer. This edge is quite thin. It's kind of tempting to hit on that, but you can really easily break it, so be careful there. There's a little bit of a groove here where water comes out, so I'm going to try a little bit of prying here with a screwdriver as well. but just sort of patiently work your way around, see if you can get it to come loose if you have this problem. So I just gave it a few taps on here with the rubber mallet, which is a much stronger part, and now it's just opened up a little bit of crack, so we should be home and hosed here. And there you go. I'll give you a bit of an orientation. So so you got four 10mm nuts that hold the housing to the base plate here, to the gearbox. And this metal part here, so you've got this part that actually is just almost like a big washer that helps spread the even pressure down. Quite often you don't have this part coming up over the top. This is that little rubber plug that seals the pipe, the outlet from the water pump up to the power head, and this is the drive shaft for the motor. So I'm going to undo these 4 bolts, take this off, take the housing off, and you'll see the impeller, everything inside. Best way to get these pump housing off is just to get a little screwdriver in and pry it up a bit, and then the whole thing will slide up. And what you're left with is this base plate we saw in the kit, the impeller, and inside connecting the impeller to the drive shaft is the little Woodruff key. Now, what you're looking for with these impellers, so it's the age that makes them keep that bend, because they're a tight fit. The whole purpose of them is to fit inside this eccentric sort of shaped housing. But you're really looking for signs of wear, where the tips of these impeller blades are getting thin, brittle, cracked, anything like that. And to be honest with you, once you've got it open, it probably is worth just replacing. So I'll put the new one in while we're here. I'll probably use most of this hardware, or clean up the base plate and everything, and then I'll use the rest of the kit on that older outboard and just buy an individual impeller, none of the other parts for that. So to get this off, once again, I'll probably get a screwdriver just underneath it and we'll just slide it up. It can be worth sort of cleaning the shaft, because it has to slide all the way up the drive shaft off the end. So if this is a bit corroded and a bit rough, then giving this a bit of a clean can help you slide the old one off and the new one on. This shaft isn't too bad, so I'm just going to give it a wipe with a rag and a bit of brake cleaner. If yours is quite corroded, then a really fine grit emery paper is not going to hurt to wipe this section. It doesn't turn on anything or anything like that. These impellers are quite a tight fit, so don't be surprised if it takes a little bit of effort to get it up the shaft. It's locked from turning, but it's not locked from sliding up at all. Sorry about the glare in this shot. I can't actually find a better angle with this vise where it is. So that's the impeller off. It's the one we're going to replace. It actually does have a little bit of wear, a little bit of debris on that. So it is used in very sort of turbid, salty water, which is obviously a bit more abrasive. I'll show you here quickly though. If you don't have a spare one, this is the little Woodruff key. This is the key that causes the impeller to spin with the shaft. So just be careful you don't lose that when you take your impeller off if you don't have one. Base plate's cleaned up now. Inside here is that inner housing we were looking at before, this little with the impeller rubbers against. There's nothing wrong with that, it's in fine condition. But what I will do is replace the O-ring here with this other O-ring, just because I've got it here. So the impeller and the O-ring, the only two parts we're replacing on this. And then we'll put it back together. I'm going to use a pick like these, really handy tool to have floating around, just to fish this old O-ring out. Just a little bit of a wipe in the groove that it goes in. Here's the new O-ring. I'm just going to put a bit of rub grease on it. Just run a small amount around. Press that in. I'm also just going to take a small amount of this rubber grease Just put a really light smear around the inside of this pump, just so when it starts up for the first time the impeller doesn't get damaged, the new one. Now putting these impellers on, we'll open the other one. When they're new, they're still pretty straight, and then once they've been in the housing for a while they get this curve. What you'll also notice is there's the slot in them, if I can show you. There's a slot sort of along here which is where the woodruff key goes in. That slot doesn't go all the way to the top, so you can only put it on this way, you can't put it on this way because the woodruff key will hit the backing here. So make sure you slide it down the right way. Then if you look at the way the old one went, so in this case the slot's at the bottom, so I know it went that way, you'll see that Yamaha motors turn clockwise. So as it turns, it's pushing those, imagine it turning clockwise, it's pushing these blades back this way. And that's important information for us to have. You can also, to make it a little bit easier, just put a little bit of grease, it's not too much, just on the inside, just to help it slide down the drive shaft a little bit more easily. Another tip, again, is when you look at this woodruff key slot, you'll see it's aligned with this blade. So when you've got it upside down, if you keep an eye on that blade, you'll know where you have to align it with the key. So slide the new one down, align that blade with the woodruff key, and on it goes. Now, the reason I was saying about the Yamaha's turning clockwise is that what we're going to do now is these blades are wider than this housing. That's why they bend like this. So as we slide the housing on the top, I'm just going to start turning these blades clockwise, or turning the drive shaft clockwise. So as the blades come into the housing, they don't go into the housing sort of facing one way and then expect it to flip the other. They're facing in the way that the motor will naturally want them to turn. Alright, now I'm just going to do these 10mm bolts up again. When it comes to tightening these bolts, what we're really looking for is a bit of an even pressure. So I've got them all lipped up now. And I'm just going to slowly go around, just give them each a bit of a tighten until they feel even and feel pretty snug. Not looking to snap the heads off the bolts. I actually don't have a torque setting off the top of my head for these, but snug and even pressure is really what we're looking for here. Alright, let's pop this gearbox back on. One make through here, slide it back up. Sometimes you will have to jiggle these a little bit for a couple of reasons. One is that the hose takes the water from the pump up to the power head. It has to slot into the pump itself, obviously. And the other is that the splines at the top of the drive shaft have to align with the female splines in the power head. But once they do, you're all good to go. One thing I didn't say before is that I've left this particular boat in neutral. So the gear selector's in neutral and the gearbox here is in neutral. So all I really need to do now is just wind that collar back on and it should all be aligned. If you're having trouble reaching that collar, you can put the boat in reverse, which will bring the collar down, give you better access to it. And then the gearbox is in reverse and the controls in reverse. That's fine. The only real issue is that when they go back together, they're aligned with each other, synchronized with each other. All right, and because you're the do-it-yourself type man or woman, you're likely to be the next person working on this. So just put a little bit of this is a little bit of the anti-seize that I use for aluminium. Don't use the copper stuff in aluminium. Just put a little, it's probably going to be too much, on each bolt, because the bolts down this low end of the housing can get pretty corroded. And you're just making life easier if it's off next time round. So I'll go around, put a little dog anti-seize in each of these and do them up. And then I'll tighten them up again. Next thing I'm going to look at is the thermostat. The thermostats open up when the engine gets up to temperature, or the water gets up to temperature, and allows water to circulate through the jackets that cool the engine. So when the motor starts, the telltale will start running straight away, even if the thermostat's closed. But it's only when this thermostat opens that you're actually doing any real cooling of the engine. So also just be aware, if you're going to check this, that you'll need whatever little gasket goes for your thermostat, because there's a really good chance that when you take this cover off, this thermostat will tear. And even if it doesn't, you know, it needs to seal well, otherwise you'll leak water out here and you'll start shorting out HT leads or whatever. So this particular one just has 3 10mm nuts. So I'll just put this camera down, take these off, and then we'll test the thermostat. So once those bolts are off, this top's still a bit sticky, so it's actually got a little lip under here. So we'll just get this across. I'll push up this way. There we go. So cover off, thermostat sits in here. Lift it out, and yeah, it's a little bit crusty. Once again, I think it's been sitting for a while, but we'll clean it up and we'll go test it. So you see here the top of this thermostat's closed at the moment. So I just got a bowl of water out of the kettle, and we'll pop it in. If you see that top section, we'll see if this is warm enough to open. You can just see it rising up now. And so you can pretty much give this one a clean bit of health. To be really scientific about it, you can put it in cold water and then slowly heat the water as with a thermostat in it and see the exact point it opens. But I think that's good enough for me. The biggest problem is if they're just completely seized shut and you'll never get any cooling water through the outboard. This thermostat gasket's in really good condition, so I am going to leave it on. Textbook will tell you to replace it every time, and certainly have one with you, because if it does tear or gets even just the surface torn off it, this is actually in really good nick, so I'm happy with that. But you won't really be able to use the boat without either some sort of suitable sealant or a gasket, so have one even as a backup. But to my mind, you know, it's not a spare part that's going to deteriorate sitting on the shelf, so save it when you need it. So pop him back in. Put the cover back on, tighten the bolts up, and I think we're getting ready to give this a running test now. Well, that about wraps it up for today. I hope this video helps you if you are looking at servicing your outboard yourself. I did actually end up filming changing the oil in a 4-stroke, but the footage wasn't really usable, so apologies for that not getting included here, but I will do a sort of supplementary video to go with this for people who own 4-stroke outboards sometime soon. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please rate, comment and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.